Hey guys, tonight we listen to a relaxing story. You get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. Let's begin the story. The wind had been still all week, a rare calm that made even the trees seem to hold their breath. In the small village of Salem, the air hung heavy, damp with the smell of earth and with smoke. Chickens clucked restlessly in their coops, dogs barked at nothing, and in the distance, the church bell gave one hollow ring before falling silent again. No one remembered ringing it. That evening, the sun slipped beneath the horizon like it was afraid to linger. The last light faded through a thick veil of clouds, and the fields turned gray, then black. The villagers gathered their children inside, latched their doors, and whispered short prayers before the fire. There had been talk of sickness spreading in nearby towns, fevers, fits, strange dreams. But here in Salem, the nights have been quiet. Until that night, it began with a scream, a sound so sharp and sudden that it cut through the windless dark like glass breaking underwater. A mother's voice followed, then another scream, smaller, higher, a child's. Within moments, doors swung open up and down the single dirt road. Torches flickered to life, and men stumbled out clutching axes and lanterns. The woods beyond the village swayed though there was no wind, and shadows seemed to twist at the edges of the trees. The child's name was Ruth, 7 years old, gone. Her mother was found on the ground near the edge of the forest, her hands clawing at the soil. She couldn't speak, only tremble and stammer one word again and again. He took her, but when they asked who, her eyes rolled white and she fainted. By midnight, the search had begun. They fanned out through the trees, calling Ruth's name, the light from their lanterns bobbing through the mist. It was so quiet that each man could hear his own heartbeat. At one point, someone thought he saw movement ahead, a small figure darting between the trunks. They gave chase, shouting, but found only a torn ribbon caught on a branch. The ribbon was red. By dawn, there was no trace of Ruth. No footprints, no blood, not even a piece of her dress except that single ribbon. The searchers returned home hollow-eyed, shoulders slumped, not daring to speak of what they thought they'd heard deeper in the woods, a soft humming, like a lullaby coming from nowhere. Inside his dim study, Reverend Samuel Parris sat alone by candlelight, his hand shaking as he wrote in his journal. March 1st, 1692, he scrawled. The night the wind changed, light seen in the wood, moving against the moon. A cry like the voice of a child, then silence. I fear the Lord's warning has begun. He paused, the ink dripping slowly from his quill. Outside, something brushed against the window pane, a pale handprint that vanished when he looked closer. The candle flickered, though the air was still. He closed the book, whispered a prayer, and told himself he imagined it. But long after he lay in bed, he could still hear it. The faint rhythm of footsteps on the frozen ground outside, circling the parsonage, too light to be a man's, too steady to be an animal's. And somewhere beyond the trees, a child began to laugh. A soft, distant laugh that echoed like wind through the hollow bones of the forest. The next morning, the sky over Salem was the color of iron, and every clock in town had stopped at the same hour, just before midnight. The morning after Ruth vanished, Salem was quieter than usual. The air itself seemed to hum, a low vibration that made the candle flames tremble and the crows avoid the fields. People spoke in whispers, as though sound itself might call something unwanted. Mothers kept their children indoors, and even the men who worked in the forest carried their axes closer to their chests. In the parsonage, Reverend Paris's niece, Abigail, sat by the fire with the other girls, Mercy Lewis, Betty Paris, and Putnam. They were supposed to be reading scripture, but the pages lay open and forgotten in their laps. The fire burned low, and its light flickered on their faces. Abigail stared into the coals, unblinking, her lips moving faintly though no words came. Betty was the first to fall. It started with a small tremor, a jerk of her hand like she'd been startled. Then her body stiffened, her back arching so sharply the wooden chair beneath her toppled to the floor. She let out a sound none of them had ever heard, half cry, half hiss, and her eyes rolled white. "Betty!" Mercy cried, reaching for her, but the moment her fingers touched the girl's arm, she yanked them back. Her skin was burning hot. Abigail dropped to her knees beside her cousin, trying to hold her still as she thrashed, mumbling something too fast to understand. Then suddenly, she went still. The room froze with her. When Abigail leaned close, Betty whispered, "He's here." Abigail swallowed hard. "Who?" But Betty's eyes stayed fixed on the ceiling, her voice thin as smoke. "The man made of smoke. He said your name." The fire popped sharply in the hearth, and a wisp of ash rose and curled upward like a dark hand. By evening, the fit spread. Mercy collapsed during supper, convulsing so violently the table overturned, and screamed that she could see claws beneath her own skin. The girls claimed invisible hands pinched them, dragged them by their hair, left scratches that bled but healed within minutes. By the second night, the entire village knew. The pastor's house was crowded with neighbors clutching Bibles and candles, watching as the girls trembled on the floorboards, their small bodies twisting in unnatural rhythm. Abigail sat in the corner, trembling, her eyes darting to the window again and again. Reverend Paris prayed over them until his voice grew hoarse. When he finally stopped to catch his breath, Abigail spoke, her voice flat and distant. "He said they're coming for us." The room went silent. "Who's coming, child?" Paris asked. She looked up at him slowly. "The ones whose names he whispered. The ones who made a promise." "What promise?" he asked. Abigail's head tilted as if she were listening to something the others couldn't hear. "To keep him sleeping," she said softly. "But now he's awake." The air turned cold. Every flame in the room shivered. That night, the villagers carried the girls to separate homes, hoping prayer and distance would break whatever spell had taken hold. But the next morning, each of them woke with the same bruises in the same place, dark, finger-shaped marks around their wrists. One of the mothers swore she saw her daughter standing by the window before dawn, speaking to no one. When she asked who she was talking to, the child smiled faintly and said, "He told me who to name." By noon, the first accusations began. It was Goody Osborne, Goody Good, Tituba, the slave who told the girls stories by firelight. Names spilled from their lips like ash, one after another, as though whispered from somewhere else. And though the sun shone bright over Salem that day, people swore they saw shadows moving across the fields, tall, thin shapes that stretched against the light and vanished before the eyes could focus. That night, Reverend Paris opened his diary again. His hands trembled so badly he could barely write. Girls trembled on the floorboards, their small bodies twisting in unnatural rhythm. Abigail sat in the corner, trembling, her eyes darting to the window again and again. Reverend Paris prayed over them until his voice grew hoarse. When he finally stopped to catch his breath, Abigail spoke, her voice flat and distant. He said, "They're coming for us." The room went silent. "Who's coming, child?" Paris asked. She looked up at him slowly. "The ones whose names," he whispered. "The ones who made a promise." "What promise?" he asked. Abigail's head tilted as if she were listening to something the others couldn't hear. "To keep him sleeping," she said softly. "But now he's awake." The air turned cold. Every flame in the room shivered. That night, the villagers carried the girls to separate homes, hoping prayer and distance would break whatever spell had taken hold. But the next morning, each of them woke with the same bruises in the same place. Dark, finger-shaped marks around their wrists. One of the mothers swore she saw her daughter standing by the window before dawn, speaking to no one. When she asked who she was talking to, the child smiled faintly and said, "He told me who to name." By noon, the first accusations began. It was Goody Osborne, Goody Good, Tituba, the slave who told the girls stories by firelight. Names spilled from their lips like ash, one after another, as though whispered from somewhere else. And though the sun shone bright over Salem that day, people swore they saw shadows moving across the fields, tall, thin shapes that stretched against the light and vanished before the eyes could focus. That night, Reverend Paris opened his diary again. His hands trembled so badly he could barely write. "They're naming the innocent," he wrote. "Yet I fear something speaks through them. The lights in the woods have returned. They pulse like hearts beneath the trees." He closed the book when he heard a faint knock at his window. When he turned, no one was there. Only a faint smudge of soot on the glass, shaped like a hand. But this time, it wasn't small like a child's. It was long, thin, and it was still warm. The cell was cold, always cold, as if the stone itself drank the warmth from her bones. Goody Osborne sat against the wall, knees drawn to her chest, her breath clouding faintly in the dark. The smell of damp earth and rusted iron filled the air. Somewhere above her, water dripped with a steady rhythm, a heartbeat she could not silence. She had stopped crying days ago. There was no point. No one came to listen anymore. Not even the Reverend, who had once spoken kindly to her after Sunday sermons. Now, when he passed by her cell, he would not meet her eyes. They called her witch. They called her liar. They called her worse things in the square. Goody Osborne closed her eyes and tried to pray, but the words slipped through her like sand. The Lord's Prayer always caught at the same place, just before "deliver us from evil." Her tongue would not move beyond it. She had heard them outside that morning, the girls, the ones who claimed the devil spoke through her. Their voices carried down the corridor, muffled by the thick walls. She could still hear the youngest one, Betty, crying that Goody Osborne's spirit had bitten her in the night. But Goody had not left this room in 7 days. She pressed her palms against the floor, whispering to herself, "God sees my heart. God knows I am clean." Then she heard it, a faint scratching behind her. At first, she thought it was a rat, gnawing at the damp mortar between the stones. But the sound came again, deliberate, slow, like something tracing shapes in the wall. She turned, holding her breath. "Who's there?" No answer, only the steady sound of scratching. She moved closer, her fingers brushing the cold surface. The stone was damp, slick with condensation. Then her fingertips caught on something rough, shallow grooves carved deep into the rock. She couldn't see them in the dark, so she felt them instead, tracing their patterns. Circles, crosses, triangles overlapping. The marks weren't random. They were symbols, old ones, carved by someone's careful hand. That night, she could not sleep. Every few minutes, the scratching would start again, sometimes near the floor, sometimes behind her head. It never came from the same place twice. By morning, her voice was hoarse from shouting. The guard finally came, a young man who smelled of ale and ash. "There's something in these walls," she said, pointing. "It moves when I pray." He snorted. "The only thing moving is your tongue, woman." "Please," she begged. "If you don't believe me, look for yourself. You'll see." With a sigh, the guard struck a match and held the light to the wall. The orange glow revealed the carvings, hundreds of them, stretching from floor to ceiling. He stepped back, his face paling. "What in God's name?" "They were already here," she whispered. "I didn't make them." The match flickered. For a heartbeat, the shadows of the symbols seemed to crawl. The guard cursed, dropped the flame, and stumbled out, slamming the iron door behind him. That evening, 2 elders came with torches to inspect the cell. They scraped at the marks, muttering prayers, but found no explanation. "Old Puritan signs," one said finally. "Wards against evil." "Then why carve them in a jail cell?" the other asked. Neither answered. When they left, Goody Osborne sat in silence. Her hand shook as she ran her fingers over the carvings again. They were warm now. That night, the scratching returned, louder, closer. Then she heard a whisper through the wall, dry and low, like the breath of something long buried. "They see you," it said. Goody froze. "Who?" Silence. Then, the faintest laugh. The next morning, the guards found her kneeling in the corner, her eyes open but unfocused. She was humming softly, the same lullaby the missing child's mother once sang by the river. When they called her name, she did not move. When they touched her shoulder, she screamed so suddenly that one guard stumbled backward and fell. "They're inside the stone," she shouted. "They're waiting for their names." They dragged her from the cell that afternoon, bound her hands, and brought her to trial. The girls convulsed the moment she entered the hall, claiming her eyes were black as pitch and that her spirit was flying above their heads. Goody Osborne tried to speak, but her throat locked tight. Something pressed inside her chest, heavy and cold, like invisible hands holding her heart still. When the judge demanded she confess, she only whispered, "He promised I'd be free." "Ooh," they shouted, but she never answered. That night, when the guards returned to lock her cell, they found every wall smooth. The carvings were gone. Only a single word remained, cut deep into the stone beside her bed. It read, "Awake." The air in Salem grew thick with smoke. It clung to clothes, to hair, to breath. Every night, the smell of burning straw drifted through the crooked streets as the townsfolk gathered in the square, building small fires that ate up the darkness. They said it was to purify the air, to drive the devil from their midst, but the flames were hungry for something more. Children huddled close to their mothers while the men piled together bundles of sticks shaped into crude figures. Faces were carved into them with trembling hands, some with nails hammered for eyes, others smeared with ash to resemble the accused. One by one, the effigies were thrown into the fire. The crowd sang hymns too fast, too loud, the notes cracking in the cold air. Reverend Paris stood among them, Bible in hand, his voice rising over the noise. The Lord's fire cleanses all evil. Let no witch find rest in our sight. Each word was met with a roar of approval, but beneath the shouting there was another sound, a low, pulsing murmur, like wind moving through hollow wood. No one seemed to notice, not at first. Only the old widow, Goody Nurse, glanced down to see her own shadow stretching wrong across the ground. It didn't follow the light. It bent away from it. She blinked and stepped back, but the shadow did not return to her feet. It lingered, long and thin, reaching toward the fire like a hand trying to touch it. She gasped, "Do you see it?" But the others were too busy chanting, faces lit by flame. The shadows of their bodies writhed and twisted across the walls of the meeting house, each one moving half a second too late, as if struggling to keep up. By morning, the fire pits were reduced to smoldering ash. The ground was covered in a thin gray film that stung the skin when the wind lifted it. Noverd sang, no insect sterth. Inside his parsonage, Paris wrote feverishly. They burn to banish fear, he scribbled, but the fire feeds it instead. They see witches everywhere, even in their own kin. A man accused his sister today. He swore she smiled while he dreamed of drowning. The shadows stretch long in the morning, though the sun is behind us. He stopped writing when the floor creaked behind him. "Abigail," he called softly. No answer, only the slow whisper of something moving across the wooden planks. He turned, heart hammering. The room was empty, but the candlelight behind him flickered once, twice, then bent sharply toward the corner where no one stood. That same night, in the square, they built a new fire. This time they burned not straw, but the belongings of those accused: clothes, books, tools, anything touched by the suspected. The air filled with the smell of burning cloth and wax. Someone threw in a mirror. It cracked in the heat, splitting the firelight into a dozen small suns that danced over the faces of the crowd. Mercy Lewis began to shake again. She pointed to the flames, eyes wide. "He's in there," she screamed. "He's watching us through the light." The villagers pulled her away, praying loudly, but several turned to look anyway. For a moment, they thought they saw it too. A shape within the blaze, tall and shifting, its face made of smoke and ember, turning slowly as if looking for someone. When the fire burst upward in a sudden gust, they fell to their knees, crying out to heaven. Later, when the crowd dispersed and the embers cooled, only one man remained behind to stamp out the last of the coals. He was a blacksmith named Thomas, known for his silence. As he crushed the ashes underfoot, he noticed something strange. Footprints in the soot, small ones, like a child's, circling the pit. He followed them a few paces, and then they stopped abruptly, as if the child had been lifted straight into the air. He stared at the empty space and whispered a prayer, but the words felt hollow in his mouth. Behind him, in the dying glow of the fire, his own shadow slowly raised its hand and pointed at him. Thomas froze. The next morning, they found his boots by the pit. The ground around them was burned black in the shape of a circle. By then, the town had stopped questioning. Every strange noise, every flicker of light was a sign. Every whispered word was a curse. They prayed harder, louder, until their throats bled, until the air was thick with desperation. And somewhere in the forest, something listened. Something old, patient, and very near. The fires kept burning, but the darkness was learning to move with them. Reverend Samuel Parris woke before dawn, as he always did, the world outside still blue and silent. The parsonage was cold, the fire long since burned out. He rose from his bed and moved through the dim light to his desk where the letters lay. A small stack bound with twine, edges yellowed from travel and secrecy. He had not told anyone about them. Not his wife, not the elders, not even the magistrate. They had come from across the ocean, each one bearing the same broken wax seal, a serpent coiled around a cross. He untied them slowly, hands trembling, though not from cold. The first letter was written in a tight, elegant hand, the language formal, almost clerical. Your task is not to calm them, reverend, but to stir them. Fear is the only true purifier of faith. The hysteria will burn away the unbelievers. Keep the people praying. Keep them afraid. Keep the fire alive. He had read those words a dozen times, and each time they felt heavier, as if the ink itself carried weight. He told himself it was a test, that the Lord was trying his obedience, but somewhere deep in his mind, a whisper told him the voice in the letter wasn't divine at all. He folded the page, slid it back into its envelope, and locked the box again. But the lock did little to quiet the feeling that the words were still speaking to him from inside it. When he stepped outside, the air was gray with smoke from the night's burnings. Villagers were already gathering near the church, eyes hollow, voices sharp. They wanted guidance. They wanted assurance that the evil among them could be destroyed. Parris straightened his collar and took the pulpit. The wood felt warm beneath his hands, though the church was cold. He began softly, as he always did, with scripture, but soon his voice grew louder, sharper, echoing through the rafters. "Do you not see?" he cried. "The devil walks among us, wearing the faces of those we trust most. He eats at our tables, sleeps under our roofs. He smiles when we pray." The congregation murmured, then wailed. Some fell to their knees, others clutched their children close. "Only through fire," Parris roared. "Only through blood can the covenant be restored. You must name them, one by one, until the village is clean." He slammed his hand against the Bible. Dust rose from the pages like ash. From the back of the church, Abigail stared at him, her lips parted. She had never seen her uncle like this. His face glistened with sweat, his eyes wild, yet he seemed not to notice. It was as though he were speaking to someone unseen, someone standing just beyond the pulpit, listening. Later, when the church emptied, Parris stayed behind. He sank into the front pew and pressed his hands over his face. His breath came ragged, uneven. He told himself he was doing God's work. But when he opened his eyes, the Bible before him was turned to a passage he did not remember marking. "Beware the covenant of men who claim the fire as holy, for their flame feeds not on sin, but on souls." His hand trembled. The words were faintly burned into the paper, not written, but seared. He slammed the book shut and looked around. The air shimmered, faintly, as though heat rose from invisible coals. That night, he went to his study to pray, but instead of comfort, he felt watched. The shadows on the walls shifted when he moved. The candlelight flickered without wind. He opened another letter. "You have done well. The fever spreads. When the last name is spoken, you will see the truth. Do not waver now. The covenant must be sealed before midsummer." He read it twice, then burned it in the candle flame. The wax seal melted slowly, dripping onto his desk in small red beads that looked like blood. From the fire, he thought he heard a sound, faint, like someone exhaling his name. He looked toward the window. Outside, the village glowed with small fires, the people praying, chanting, crying. Their silhouettes moved in strange rhythm. For a moment, he thought he saw something standing among them, taller than the rest, faceless, smoke coiling where its head should be. He closed the curtains and fell to his knees. "Lord," he whispered, "tell me this is your will." But only silence answered him. The next morning, the congregation found him at the pulpit again, eyes red, voice ragged. His sermon was no longer about mercy or repentance. It was about cleansing, about obedience, about sacrifice. And though no one dared to say it aloud, every person in the church that morning felt the same chill. The sense that their preacher's voice did not belong only to him anymore. Something else was speaking through him, and it wanted fire. The river behind Salem was swollen from the recent storm, its current restless and loud even at night. The moonlight turned its surface silver, but beneath the shimmer ran a deep red hue, as though the earth itself bled into the water. 5 villagers met there after midnight, beneath the twisted willow that leaned across the bank. They came without torches, carrying only small lanterns shielded by cloth. Their faces were drawn, eyes darting toward the village as if the darkness itself might be listening. Thomas's brother led them, Joseph Haynes, a blacksmith with soot still clinging to his hands. His voice trembled when he spoke. "It wasn't witchcraft that brought this curse," he said quietly. "It was us." The others shifted uneasily. "We were digging near the meeting house after the storm," he continued. "The ground had split open by the foundations. I thought it was a root at first, a dark one, thick as my arm. But it wasn't. It was stone, carved buried deep." He paused, glancing at the water. "We pulled it out." "What was it?" someone whispered. Joseph swallowed. "A slab, like an altar. There were markings on it. Not in any tongue I've seen. Circles and lines like the ones they say witches use, but older. It looked burned, as if it had been buried to keep the fire from spreading." The group fell silent. Somewhere in the woods, an owl called once, then stopped. "Where is it now?" asked Goody Nurse. "In my forge," Joseph said. "I couldn't leave it there in the rain. But ever since I brought it home, the iron won't hold heat. The coals die before dawn. And my dreams," he trailed off, pressing a hand to his temple. "There's a voice in them. It says my name again and again. Last night it told me to return the stone to the water." He knelt and dipped his fingers into the river. The current caught the light and seemed to pulse. "Look," he whispered. The others leaned closer. The river's surface moved strangely, swirling in slow, deliberate patterns. For a moment, they thought they saw shapes within, faint, human, twisting just below the waterline. A woman gasped and stepped back. "It's the blood," another murmured. "It's all the blood we've spilled." Joseph shook his head. "No, it's older than us." He pulled something from his coat, a small shard of black stone, smooth and curved, the size of a palm. Even in the faint moonlight, it glimmered with an oily sheen, reflecting no color they could name. "I broke it when I moved it," he said, "and since then, nothing's been right." The group stared at the fragment. The air grew heavy. The wind that should have moved the branches above them died all at once, and the river's sound dulled to a slow, thick murmur. "Bury it again," Goody Nurse said, her voice sharp. "Now." Joseph nodded, trembling. He stepped into the shallow water, the mud sucking at his boots. When he crouched, the reflection of the moon bent and shuddered, ripples spreading like cracks across glass. He lowered the stone. For a moment, it hovered in his palm, as though resisting. Then it slipped beneath the surface with a faint hiss, like something exhaling in relief. The water stilled. They all stood in silence. The night seemed to breathe again. A soft wind moved through the reeds, and the lantern flames steadied. Then came the smell. Iron and rot, faint but unmistakable. Joseph froze. The river bubbled where the stone had sunk. Small red plumes rose to the surface, swirling like ink. "Joseph," one man whispered. He didn't answer. His eyes were wide, fixed on the water. "It's warm," he said. "The river's warm." When they reached for him, he stumbled backward, gasping, clutching his arm. Blood trickled through his sleeve. A mark had appeared just below his wrist, a circle crossed with 3 lines. The same shape carved into the black stone. The others dragged him to shore, but the mark didn't fade. It pulsed faintly, as though alive. "Say nothing of this," Goody Nurse ordered. "Not to the Reverend, not to anyone. If what we've stirred is truly ancient, our prayers won't stop it." They left the river one by one, their lanterns flickering out as they went. Joseph stayed behind a moment longer, staring at the rippling water. The reflection of the moon looked wrong. Too many shapes, too many faces moving just beneath it. When he finally turned to follow the others, something cold brushed his ankle. He looked down. A hand, pale and thin, with skin like wax, reached from the water and gripped him once before vanishing beneath the surface. The river went still again. By morning, the water ran clear. But the mark on Joseph's arm had darkened, spreading up toward his heart. And beneath the old meeting house, where the storm had torn the ground open, the earth moved once more, just enough to let a whisper escape. It sounded like a name. At first, the silence was a mercy. After weeks of shrieking, pleading, and curses echoing through the meeting hall, the accused had finally fallen quiet. The magistrates thought it a sign of repentance, that perhaps the devil's hold was weakening. But when the women began to whisper, something in the air changed. No one could make out the words at first. They sounded like wind through the rafters, low, rhythmic, almost musical. The prisoners sat in their chains, eyes open but unfocused, lips moving in perfect unison. Even the youngest among them, who had been near catatonic for days, now spoke the same strange syllables. "Write it down," ordered Judge Hathorne. His voice trembled slightly, though he masked it with authority. "Every word. It may be evidence of confession." The court recorder, Elias Ward, dipped his quill into ink and began transcribing. He wrote quickly, his hand moving faster than seemed possible, the black lines scratching across the parchment. The whispers didn't stop. They grew louder, weaving and folding over one another, until the air in the hall vibrated with their rhythm. Elias's brow dripped with sweat. His handwriting, once neat, became jagged. It's not English," he muttered. "Not Latin either." He glanced up. "It feels wrong to write it." "Do as you are told," Hathorne snapped. So Elias wrote. His fingers cramped, but still he wrote, line after line, ink blotting and bleeding through the page. The words seemed to guide his hand, the quill scraping faster and faster until it almost tore through the parchment. Then his writing changed. the letters twisted, looping into symbols no one recognized. Circles crossed with lines, runes that seemed to shimmer in the candlelight. "Elias," the magistrate warned. "What are you?" Elias's quill snapped in half. He stared down at the parchment, chest heaving. His eyes darted across what he'd written, and then he began to laugh. Not a laugh of madness at first, but one of revelation. He clutched the page to his chest and whispered, "It's not a curse. It's a promise." The prisoners fell silent. Every head turned toward him. One of the women, her eyes clouded white, spoke, her voice layered with echoes. "Read it." Elias obeyed. He stood, the parchment trembling in his hands, and began to recite the strange symbols aloud. The words were guttural, ancient, filled with sound and breath that didn't belong to any tongue of man. As he spoke, the candles dimmed, the air thickened, the flames stretching sideways as if pulled by unseen wind. The chains around the prisoners rattled softly, not from struggle, but in rhythm with the chant. Hathorn shouted for him to stop, but his voice was swallowed by the sound. Elias's pupils dilated until his eyes were black. The parchment burned in his hands, curling and hissing like flesh on a fire, yet he did not drop it. With a last word left his mouth, every candle went out. Darkness swallowed the room. Then a low hum. It came from beneath the floorboards, deep and resonant, like the earth itself was waking. Someone screamed, but their voice was cut short. When the torches were relit, Elias Ward was gone. Only ash remained where he had stood. The prisoners sat motionless, their eyes clear now, their faces calm. Judge Hathorn stared at them, trembling. "What did you make him say?" The oldest of the women smiled faintly. "We didn't make him say it," she said. "We only remembered." Outside, the church bell began to ring, though no one had touched it. Its sound carried through Salem, echoing in waves that made the windows tremble and the livestock cry out. Those who heard it felt something stir behind their eyes, a faint rhythm pulsing with the same strange beat the women had whispered. By morning, 3 more villagers were speaking in the same tongue. And in the recorder's abandoned home, the parchment that had burned to ash lay whole again upon his desk, the ink still wet, the words shifting slowly as though alive. They gathered before dawn, the sky still bruised with the last traces of night. The gallows stood at the edge of town, crude timber, rough-hewn, smelling of sap and iron nails. A crowd had already formed by the time I arrived, clutching my ink and quill, sent by the magistrate to record history in the service of truth. But there was no truth here, only fear, thick, choking, and alive. Bridget Bishop stood at the center, her red cloak torn, her hands bound before her. She looked older than I'd imagined, smaller somehow, but her eyes, they burned. Not with terror, not with guilt, but with something that made me look away. They said she bewitched men's dreams, that she whispered to shadows, that her cider turned to blood beneath the moon. The hangman didn't look her in the eyes. None of them did. The townsfolk prayed loudly, as if to drown out their own doubts. Mothers held their children close, and the Reverend Paris stood on the platform, shouting words that no longer felt holy. I wrote every one, my hand shaking. When Bridget spoke, her voice carried clean through the morning fog. "You are burning yourselves," she said. "You just haven't felt the fire yet." Someone struck her across the face for that, but she didn't flinch. The rope was tied. The bell rang. The trapdoor fell open with a sound that cracked the air, and in that instant, as her body dropped, the sky shifted. The light turned red, not the soft red of sunrise, but deep and living, like blood spreading through water. The sun itself seemed to pulse. The air grew hot. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The executioner froze mid-step. Every shadow stretched long and trembling, as though trying to crawl away from the ground that cast them. Then I saw it, the smoke rising from beneath the gallows. It moved too thickly for mere breath of rope and dust. It curled upward, forming shapes that no wind should make. Faces. I saw my mother's face first, long dead these 10 years, her eyes weeping black tears. Then others, friends, strangers, children. Their mouths opened, but no sound came out. Only a faint hiss like breath being drawn in over and over. The villagers screamed. Some fell to their knees, some ran, some simply stared, whispering prayers to a god that no longer felt near. The crimson light deepened. The smell of burning cloth filled the air, though there was no fire, not yet. And then Bridget's eyes opened. Her body hung limp, but her eyes, white and wide, glowed faintly through the rising smoke. I heard her voice, though her lips did not move. You cannot hang what has already been promised. The rope frayed. The beam cracked. The crowd fled in all directions. By the time the light faded and the sky returned to gray, Bridget Bishop's body was gone. The rope swung empty. The wood beneath was scorched black, as if licked by flame. As if licked by flame. I ran from the hill, clutching my notes to my chest. When I reached the church, I found the ink had bled across the pages, red, not black. The words had changed. I no longer recognized my own handwriting. It said, "One fire lit another," and below that, a name written in the same red ink. My own. I found the diary by accident, or maybe it found me. After Bridget Bishop's burning, Salem became a graveyard that refused to stay still. The air buzzed with prayers and screams alike, and every door slammed at sunset as if the night itself were a trespasser. I'd stopped sleeping. The red in the sky had faded, but its echo lived in every firelight, in every reflection of water or glass. It was late one evening when I went to the parsonage to deliver my records to Reverend Paris. He hadn't preached for days, not since the gallows cracked. His windows were shuttered, his candles always burning low. When I knocked, no one answered, but the latch on the back door was broken, and something, curiosity, guilt, perhaps something darker, led me inside. The house smelled of wax and ink. The study was worse. Pages lay scattered across the desk, all filled with the Reverend's angular handwriting. Verses from Scripture lined the walls, nailed there like wards, but the words were smudged, as though something had tried to erase them. And then I saw it, the black book. It was bound in thick leather, darker than pitch, its cover warm to the touch. No title, just a faint engraving on the spine, Covenant. Inside, the handwriting was neater, calmer. The first pages were familiar. Names, dates, confessions. The ledger of the trials. But as I turned the pages, the ink changed color from brown to red, and the words shifted tone. March 4th, 1692. Another child ill. Her voice not her own. We prayed till dawn, but the whisper continued. They see what we buried. March 9th is not the devil. It is older. The deeper I read, the colder the room became. April 1st, the artifact beneath the meeting house. Its seal is broken. The symbols carved by the first settlers were not decoration. They were a warning. April 6th, to stop it, the mouth must close. One soul given freely for those taken unjustly. A circle of ash, a prayer inverted. The heart must still beat when the fire begins. The ink at that line was smeared, as if from tears or blood. My hands trembled. The diary described every death, every hanging, every confession. But each was followed by a mark. A small crescent burned into the margin. Some pages were sticky, others blackened at the edges, as though they'd been too close to flame. At the back, a loose page slipped free. It was not written by Paris. The script was different, rougher, desperate. He preaches to save us, but he serves something else. The book is his chain. If he cannot end it, another must. The sacrifice cannot be of sinless blood. It must be one who has seen. I stared at that last line until my vision blurred. I had seen Bridget's face in the smoke, the words on my own pages shifting, my name written in red where no ink should flow. I felt watched. The candle flickered, and for an instant, a shadow passed behind me, though no one was there. I turned back to the diary, but it had changed again. The page I just read was blank. In its place, fresh words were forming, the ink still glistening. You found it. You were meant to. The flame on the desk flared, tall and silent. The shadow stretched across the wall, long and thin, like a figure standing over my shoulder. And the next line bled into view. One sacrifice to close the mouth. Yours. I slammed the book shut, heart pounding. The leather cover was hot now, almost burning my palms. I threw it across the room. It landed with a dull thud, but the warmth lingered in my hands. Outside, the church bell began to toll, though no hand touched the rope. And as its sound rolled through the night, I heard the faintest voice whispering through the walls, the voice of Reverend Paris, long gone from this house. It takes faith to save a soul and fire to save a town. They say time heals, that the earth forgets the blood it drinks, that the wind loses its echo. But Salem never forgot. It only learned to whisper instead of scream. I'm the last one left who remembers or dares to. My hand shakes as I write this, not from age, but from the weight of what must finally be told. The others are gone. The magistrates, the preachers, the girls who saw shadows. All dust now. Yet when the wind turned from the west, I can still hear their voices, soft, pleading, unfinished. For years, they called it madness. Hysteria. They said the villagers turned on one another because of fear, superstition, greed. But they were wrong. All of them were wrong. The truth is, it was never about witchcraft. It was about keeping something locked away. I know because I was there the night we closed it. After the hangings ended and the reverend vanished, the town fell into silence. Cattle wandered the roads. Houses emptied overnight. The air stank of iron and ash. Those of us who survived gathered in the old meeting house, though none of us wanted to go near it. Beneath its floor, where the earth had been torn open by the storm, there was a hole, deep, black, breathing. It pulsed like something alive. The black diary lay on the altar, its pages open to the final prayer. We read the words, though none of us truly understood them. There were 13 of us left. We stood in a circle, each holding a candle, and began to speak the lines as one. The ground shuddered, the light dimmed, and from the pit came a sound, Not of a beast, not of a man, but of all voices at once, crying in unison. It was the sound of the town itself, weeping through every board, every bone. We sealed it the only way the diary had told us to: blood for silence, fire for mercy.